I have to say, I am very exhausted, but I'm also just very grateful ultimately that everything is good for us post Hurricane Milton. And I feel like today's episode, I know you've heard about Hurricane Milton a bunch and you've heard about, oh my goodness, it was so scary and it was coming straight to Tampa and all that. But the bigger reason I want to share more of my experience on it is not just because, okay, there's things from a diabetes standpoint that can make sense from the hurricane itself. I already did an episode dedicated to that, but it's more so the decision-making process, what thoughts were going through my head, and things just to be aware of that you may or may not actually think about until the situation happens to you. And welcome to the Your Diabetes Insider podcast, where we take all of the mysteries of blood sugar control, focusing on nutrition, exercise, and any of the other 40 plus factors that may impact your blood sugar. If you don't know me, my name is Ben Zeal. I'm a registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, strength and conditioning coach, and I've lived myself with type 1 diabetes for over 20 years. And I am here to share everything that I have learned in both my personal and professional experience so you can live that incredible diabetes life. So get ready and let's dive right into today's episode. What is going on? I have to say, I am very exhausted, but I'm also just very grateful ultimately that everything is good for us post Hurricane Milton. And I feel like today's episode, I know you've heard about Hurricane Milton a bunch and you've heard about, oh my goodness, it was so scary and it was coming straight to Tampa and all that. But the bigger reason I want to share more of my experience on it is not just because, okay, there's things from a diabetes standpoint that can make sense from the hurricane itself. I already did an episode dedicated to that, but it's more so the decision-making process, what thoughts were going through my head, and things just to be aware of that you may or may not actually think about until the situation happens to you. And I don't want the situation to happen to you. I don't wish this upon anybody, but it is crucial to be prepared, but also to be prepared outside of just what you would typically expect, right? Because you hear, oh, hurricane kit, all that. Remember all the stuff I talked about in the previous hurricane episode. And you think about diabetes, preparation, got it. But it's one thing to have it in theory. I think it's another thing to have it in practice. And those are two very different things. It's one thing to be able to say, oh yeah, I can theoretically do X, Y, and Z. But then when the lights are on and the pressure's higher, can you perform? Can you show up? Can you show out? And can you do your absolute best versus a hypothetical situation? So in a nutshell, and I'm not necessarily going to go minute by minute, day by day, how ridiculous everything was. But I remember vividly the Friday night before the storm hit on Wednesday evening and overnight into Thursday. And so that Friday night before, I remember I was peeping on our favorite guy, Mike's weather page. Shout out to Mike. He actually lives in Tampa Bay as well. And I always check his page if there's any sort of potential disturbance because he basically just aggregates everything, right? So I know, okay, all the different charts, everything's going to be there. It's one stop instead of having to go to a bunch of different places. So I see, okay, cool. There's some little tropical storm. Maybe it gets to a Cat 1, like, all right, I'm not going to say, oh, Cat 1's no big deal, but in the grand scheme, it's a nasty thunderstorm, right? All right, cool, Cat 1. I wake up the next morning, just for fun. I take a look. This is a Saturday morning. It's about 5 days before the storm. And suddenly it went from, oh, it could be a tropical storm Cat 1 to it could be a Cat 4. And given the trajectory of where it was going, it started out in the middle of the Gulf and was going straight beeline towards Tampa. My ears perked up. I'm not going to lie. I got a little bit anxious. I got a little bit nervous because storms don't typically take that path. But more importantly, in this case, thinking about it from a potential head-on perspective, Cat 4 is nothing to sneeze at. Cat 3 is nothing to sneeze at. Cat 2, it's that dicey range depending on where it's supposed to hit. And I don't know if you've experienced hurricanes before or not, but effectively, the eye of where it hits, of course, you always the eye, there's calm in the eye of the storm, right? But anything in the eye's path can get pretty nasty pretty quickly. And even in this one, I remember one of the people we listened to, Dennis Phillips, another really well-renowned meteorologist, and he was like, within a 10-mile radius for this particular storm of where the eye is going to hit, it's going to look like a bomb went off. It's going to be nasty. And so I'm thinking about these types of things. And then, of course, anywhere south of that in the storm was going to get a massive amount of storm surge. And I start thinking about how this relates to diabetes. I know I just went into super meteorology talk for a second, but how it relates to diabetes is think about it, right? You have the possibility of being marooned somewhere, stuck, and who knows? Will you have power? Will you not have power? Who knows? And so my ears are perked up. I figure, okay, I'm going to keep monitoring the storm. Sunday comes. things are just getting worse. And so at this point, I'm expecting to have to leave in some capacity. I'm expecting to leave. I start prepping my stuff. First thing I do is my diabetes supplies. So of course, I've got my insulin. I take everything, pretty much everything I've got that's useful. By useful, I mean, hey, if I can fit as many pen needles as I can, but at some point you don't need any more. I took probably about 4.5 to 5 months worth of stuff. And the reason being, this at the time was going to go straight through Tampa. Like the line on the graph where the eye would go, the midpoint was literally a block north of where I am recording this right now. And if that's the case, I don't know what's going to happen. Am I not going to have a place to live? I really don't know. So I took 4 to 5 months of diabetes supplies, maybe even more from a CGM standpoint, because I did learn I only have a few Dexcom G6s left, so I'll be switching to G7 relatively soon. I'll definitely do an episode on that. But I may have taken a little bit more because G7's so small, it was easy to fit into the container. So I had a couple, those giant big plastic tubs full of diabetes stuff. I had my insulin ready to go. Of course, I'm packing other meds, I'm packing clothes. I'm pretty much operating under the expectation that there's a chance that I will not get to return to our condo for either weeks, months, or forever. And it's really depressing to say that, because imagine the amount of stress. You work so hard to be able to have a place, you're like, hey, this is my own, this is my stuff, this is amazing. And suddenly something that's completely out of your control is now barreling towards you that has the potential to be life-threatening and be extremely scary and potentially harm everything you've worked so hard for. And so initially I'm thinking, okay, I don't know the strength of this, but I know I've got to move inland. And so at first I end up going up closer to one of my friends who's near the Ocala area. She's outside Ocala, probably 30 minutes south or so. And so it's certainly inland. It's probably about 80 miles inland from where I am right now, away from the bay, away from the water. And so I think about the situation and I'm still stressed out of my gourd because the path continues showing straight through Tampa. It's getting stronger now. Now we're getting into Monday and it's showing potential Cat 5. If it hit Cat 5 on land, that's catastrophic. That's like the end of this city, right? So I'm super concerned. My focus is all over the place. My cortisol is through the roof. Somehow, by the grace of God, my blood sugar is actually not terrible. It's running a little bit higher, but part of that is just because it's all the cortisol, it's all of the nerves. And I'm not terribly mad because I could put some sort of adjustment, right? I've talked about before, stress will wreak havoc on your blood sugars, and it will. But think about it, right? Stress on your blood sugars can only be dealt with truly through if you chill out your subconscious mind. Until you chill out your subconscious mind, you're going to stay stressed. Your number is going to stay super high. I've told this story before, but way back in grad school, I was in an awful relationship. I had a ton of exams coming up. Things were super stressful. My blood sugar sat at 220 and I kept correcting. Nothing mattered until I finally truly chilled out. I basically surrendered. My brain was like, I'm over it. I can't keep stressing. And then my number went right back to 125. So similar situation here. I know I can up all of my basal rates and my boluses, but it's not going to have a massive impact until I truly relax. And so I get to my friends, and at this time, the storm path, there's a wide cone, right? If you haven't heard of a cone, it's basically all the possibilities of where the storm could actually go. And so there's the upper part of the cone, and there's a center line of the cone, and none of it matters. If it's in the cone, that could be the path that it will go. And so I start to discover my friend's place is in the middle of the cone. There's an amazing setup there. They also don't have a generator. And I start thinking about things, and I'm still stressed out of my mind. It's really hard to focus on pretty much anything. And what I'm realizing is they don't have a generator, which isn't a bad thing per se if they keep power. But what happens if you don't have power and you live with diabetes? What are you going to do? It's Florida. It's in the 80s to 90s of degrees. Your insulin has to stay cool. They had a situation where they were able to get a fridge for insulin, so the insulin would have been okay. But again, think about it as people with diabetes. Dehydration, what that does to your blood sugar. You get way more insulin resistant. It's a lot harder for your number to come down. The more dehydrated you are, you're more susceptible to a high blood sugar that can go even higher. So that's already a scary prospect, because if there's no electricity, there's no air conditioning. Suddenly you're super warm. I don't do well when it's super, super hot out in terms of sleeping. So then, okay, now you're not sleeping. That's going to make you way more insulin resistant. So I had this thought going through my brain. I'm already insulin resistant from dehydration, but potentially if they lost power. What if I'm not sleeping? That's going to be a problem. Then I'm super stressed because there's a storm coming. That's going to raise my blood sugar. So there's just this constant battle in my brain of like, did I go far enough? Am I okay? I know the storm's supposed to hit land and then it's supposed to dissipate and weaken. But like, what happens? I'm still in the cone. What happens if the storm decides to take an upper trajectory and go straight towards where I am now? Then it would almost be like, why did I even leave in the first place? Because if it starts going north, then I just evacuated to put myself into the harm's way. And there are people, you go searching, whether it's I guess they call it X these days, on X or on Reddit or wherever. And there's people that talk about, yeah, I evacuated for a fill in the blank previous storm. And I went north or south, pick a direction, north or south. And then I ended up moving into the exact path of the storm. And so I'm starting to get a little bit concerned. I know it's Monday. The storm's supposed to hit Wednesday night. So I know there's still an okay amount of time to maneuver. So I'm realizing I'm like, I have to make a decision by Tuesday as to where I'm going to be. And so I had the option to go all the way up to North Carolina, which is way, way far, probably dramatically far. But on the flip side, also very much out of any potential path of this storm, because this storm was going from west to east. It wasn't one of those ones that's going from south to north, where it could potentially go up to North Carolina. This was a storm that was literally going from west to east. It really had no impact on North Carolina at all, which is good after what happened in western North Carolina with the previous storm, Helene. And so I finally get to a point where I'm like, I cannot chill out enough. My blood sugar's suffering as a result. I'm really concerned if, God forbid, there's a problem. And also remember, with hurricanes, there's tornadoes that spawn. I think that Wednesday when the storm hit had like the most tornado warnings in the history of Florida in one day ever. Like, it was something crazy. Like, tornadoes are going to show up. People's power is going to go out. Like, it just gets ridiculous. And I got to a point where I was just like, you know what? From a mental health standpoint, which I cannot emphasize enough, mental health is so important. As a person with diabetes, you're already so much more susceptible to anxiety. You're so much more susceptible to depression, really all of the different emotions, because you're already dealing with this every single day. The last thing that you want is, you already are stressed enough about your blood sugar. Now you've got another thing potentially impacting it. And so I just made the executive decision on Tuesday morning. I was like, you know what? If I'm going to get to leave and I'm going to go all the way north, I need to do it today. Probably should have just done it on Monday, but straight up, I went to North Carolina. I went to the eastern side of the state. So fortunately, like, it wasn't impacted at all by the previous storm. And I spent the storm there. And thankfully, I'm sure it's not a coincidence at all, I was able to relax a little bit mentally. I was able to get a little bit calmer. Sure, I was still nervous. The storm was still going to be hitting. I'm separated from Amelia. It's me and Roscoe P. and a carload of our stuff. Amelia's on the hurricane team at the hospital. So I'm separated from her. She's staying in Tampa directly, although she's in the safest place she could be, but still, she's staying for the storm. But from an overall stress standpoint, it probably reduced it by about 75%, which was crucial. And then I noticed during that time, my blood sugar was so much better. And I don't think that was an accident. What I will also say is, on the drive up, and this is again when I was talking about the theory, but can you do it in practice? I leave in a bit of a flurry on Tuesday morning, because I know there are a lot of people about to be leaving, because Tuesday is like the last day. And so I'm going north. I have to go through Jacksonville. I have to go around Savannah. There's going to be people around these areas because they're also having the same idea of, let me just get out of Florida, let me leave. And ultimately, I know there's going to be traffic. I don't plan as well as I could have, didn't eat as well as I could have. And there's times where I get to a point and I realize, holy cow, I need to eat. I still need to take care of myself. Hydration, I was able to stay on top of, which was good. But from a food standpoint, I realized at one point, I need to eat something. And so having these ideas of, hey, it's one thing to say, okay, I know I need to eat. I know I've got to have snacks. I had snacks available. I did have protein bars available. Shout out to Rise Bar for keeping me going the entire time while I was there. And they are really great with blood sugar, by the way. Just a fun little fact. And I also think if you type in Man of Zeal, if you do go to risebar.com, pretty sure you get a little bit of a discount, and they taste amazing. But that being said, I had a couple Rise Bars on the drive, but I had to be able to figure out, okay, what is a meal on the go? And this is one of those quick, instant decisions, right? You've been driving, hypothetical for you, right? You've been driving at this point for 7 hours. You've had a couple protein bars. You need to find food. You're not exactly sure where you are. It's 7 p.m. or so. It's starting to become dusk, so it's getting a little harder to see things. You're driving in God knows where, 'cause you're trying to avoid a bunch of traffic. You've already sat in a ton of traffic. You're exhausted emotionally and physically. You're starving, and you still have to find food. What do you do in that situation? So I was able to ultimately land on Zaxby's, which I still think is the greatest fast food place ever invented, thankfully. And I know that at Zaxby's, I can get a good amount of protein. Their grilled Cobb salad is phenomenal, pretty low in carb, tastes amazing, and has a ton of protein. Their chicken tenders are also fantastic as well. So I was able to get over 100 grams of protein. But in a situation like that, I knew immediately, find a Zaxby's. I know I'm in the South. I know I can find a Zaxby's. Also maybe Chick-fil-A if as a backup, right? But the question I would have for you is, in a situation like that, what is your train of thought? Are you just going? Are you even thinking about food? Are you just running on adrenaline and suddenly you end up low? Like, you have to still plan these things out because the diabetes doesn't go away. I'm stressed out of my mind. I'm exhausted emotionally, physically, mentally. I have a dog in the car who I have to take care of as well, right? Got a bunch of our stuff. There's a storm barreling down in about 24 hours and I'm ravenous and I've got to find food while still staying in a decent time trajectory because I've been driving for seemingly ever. So you have to be able to say, I can make these kinds of decisions. And again, in retrospect, could have gone on Monday, would have been a little bit calmer, and probably would have had an easier drive. In addition, probably could have thought it out a little further. Hey, on Sunday night, I'm going to stop at this place. I'm going to eat here. This is going to save me time, etc. But I didn't do that. So in the moment, are you able to come up with that audible on the fly? Where am I going to eat? What options do I have? What is around? If you're on the interstate, they have little signs. Hey, you've got this coming up in half a mile. Hey, if you're with someone in the car, hey, look up some places off of this exit. But it can be difficult when you're on your own trying to balance all of these things. So that is something you have to think about. Something else to think about, right? I sat in the car on that Tuesday night, or Tuesday day, I should say, for close to 11 hours. That is a long time. That is a lot of time without any movement. And sure, again, if I'd thought it out a little bit better, could I have said, oh, I'm going to stop here and I'm going to walk Roscoe P and it'll be great? Of course. Boost my insulin sensitivity? Of course. But you have to think about other things, right? What are other things that are possible during a strange time? Because there was a period of time I went on a bridge at I'm just going to make up a time for sake of simplicity, the front of a bridge at 5 p.m. At 5:45 p.m., I was on the other side of the bridge. I wasn't even over the bridge yet. So traffic was that standstill and that bad. For so much of it, you're sitting and there's a lot of it that's out of your control. So again, what can you do to improve insulin sensitivity, or at the very least, help keep your blood sugar in range, right? In a case like this, you're seated for a long time. You're treating it similarly to an airplane. Hey, am I going to take a temporary basal rate to increase my insulin so I can keep my number in range? That's one very reasonable possibility. You're not just going to be able to get up and start walking around because you're driving a car. So thinking about things like that are going to also be crucial. Do you have to adjust your boluses? Do you have to adjust your basal rates? Do you have to adjust correction factors because you're going to be sitting for such a long time? Plus you've got stress, plus you're exhausted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I will be straight up, I did not truly relax until the storm completely ended because it was terrifying. And I'm knocking on all the wood. We had minimal damage. We are overall okay, which I'm very grateful for, very grateful for. But these are the types of things where people don't think about it until they're already in the moment and you just don't have a choice. You're thinking about it as best as you can. You're like, okay, I've got this. I've got my hurricane plan. It's all good until it actually has to get executed. Because you can have your kit, you can have everything else, but then suddenly you're packing yourself into your car. You have to make sure your supplies are accessible while you're sitting in the car, because you could have, oh, look, I have all my supplies, but they're in the back seat. That doesn't help you. Where are your low snacks? Are they within arm's reach if you're by yourself, or are they within someone's arm reach if you're with somebody else? The dog ain't getting me the low snack. He's in the back seat, right? These are the little things. Do you have your water in a place where you can grab it? You don't have to stop the car and then have to restart the car and keep going, and it delays everything, right? Can you keep your blood sugar in a reasonable range so you're not trending down? So that way you don't have to stop and wait out a low blood sugar, because driving with a low blood sugar is not safe whatsoever. These are the little types of things you have to think about in the moment. And again, a lot of times we think of these things almost unconsciously. We just think of them and they just happen, right? You're not even paying attention. They just happen within just 20 seconds. But at the same time, you have to think of these things because suddenly you're on the road in the middle of traffic. You can't just get out of the car and say, oh, let me go get my low snacks. It has to be there, available, accessible for you. And you have to try to plan at least a little bit. And if you have to plan on the fly, you have to plan on the fly. But you have to be okay with, hey, this isn't a perfect situation, because none of it is. But that's the reason I bring all of this up, is really to just mention it's not necessarily going to be ever how you drew it up, but it's something where you can have your plan, but then you have to be able to have those skills to adapt. And if you're like, okay, well, how can I, harness these skills and hone these skills so I can adapt on the fly and it's super easy and life is good? Ultimately, the biggest thing I can say to you is just, again, it's twofold, right? Number one, to a degree, it's kind of just, hey, how do you respond? And then going back and reviewing how you responded would be one. So one would be, in this case, let me, having gone through this, look back. Almost like what I'm doing in this episode, right? Let me look back and see, okay, what could I have done differently? What could I have done better that would have allowed this situation to be a little cleaner and be a little bit easier? But the second thing you can do is putting yourself into situations that are out of your comfort zone and then seeing how you respond to those in the moment and saying, hey, I'm faced with these different decisions. What am I going to do? I'm not saying, go outside and go live in a hut for a week and see how you do. Like, you don't have to do that. But at the same time, put yourself in situations that are safe, but are out of your comfort zone, things that you're not used to necessarily doing, and it forces you to stretch your brain and think in different ways. Maybe, social situations where you're meeting new people if you're not necessarily super extroverted. Maybe a situation where you're not exactly sure where you're going, or you go on a trip without a complete itinerary and you're like, oh, this looks like fun, let's spontaneously do that. And you have to think about those different moves of how you're going to be prepared and ready to go. So honing in on those skills is going to be super important. And I do have to say, the way home, holy smokes, it was 10 and a half hours on the way home, I guess slightly quicker in a messed up way. But the way home, holy smokes, at one point, there was a bunch of traffic on the highway. And I got told by I think I used Waze, I got told, oh, hey, you can take this long highway. I think it was like Savannah Highway or something. And it was going to keep me going south. That's where I wanted to be going. And I figured, oh, okay, this will be great. This will be wonderful. I'll be off the highway, but I can still go 60 miles an hour. I don't have to worry about all the traffic and sitting there. Holy cow. I went through some towns that had like 70 people. Like, I looked them up on Wikipedia and it said one of these towns had 70 people. But the bigger thing about it was, again, the planning part of it. Remember, you're on the main highway. There's rest areas. There's places to go to the bathroom. There's, rest stops. There's gas stations right off the highway. There was none of that here. I'm going through little towns where I'm like, oh, look, I'm coming up to a town. Maybe I'll find a place to go to the bathroom. I wouldn't even have a stoplight. Like, I would go through it and be like, okay, well, where's the town? I'd be like, oh, I already went through it. Like, there was nowhere to even go to the bathroom. This was in South Carolina somewhere. And so I'm going and going and going and going. I'm like, oh, the next one I'll have a place to go to the bathroom. There was nowhere. I had to literally go over the border into Georgia and then realize, oh my God, there's a place where I can go to the bathroom. So again, planning for situations like that can be super weird. And that was one I had no idea that was coming. I didn't know I was taking that route. I had no idea there was going to be nowhere to go to the bathroom, but you have to be able to plan and adapt. I'm just so grateful to be back. I'm grateful for you listening. And overall, I'm grateful that, the damage overall was minimal for me. I know that there are people that were not as fortunate, and so my prayers are going to them, as well as, if you know of someone or someone's in a situation or a bind where they're struggling, diabetes or not, definitely let me know. I want to see how I may be able to support, my team may be able to support them. And with this, my fingers are crossed for a lot more positive vibes. No more hurricanes, please, for the rest of this year, and preferably next year too, and the year after, and, go from there. But if you're enjoying the podcast, I hope you got something out of this episode. If you're enjoying it, drop us a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you're listening. And in addition to that, note that the podcast, if you're watching the video version, is now on its own podcast channel, Your Diabetes Insider Podcast. So if you want to watch the video version, it will be there. Let me know how I can best support you with your diabetes. Happy to answer questions. Shoot me a message on Instagram or TikTok at manofzeel, MANOFTZEEL. And if you're looking for deeper support, you're like, hey, I really need some support. I got to dive deeper into this stuff. I need better blood sugars for myself, my family, for my quality of life. My team and I are here to help, and we might even take your insurance. So with that, holler at me. I will see you in the next episode.
Hope you're ready for the next episode. Hey.